Welcome to another episode of the Millennial Entrepreneur. My name's Sina, and from starting my own business while at university and getting funding from O2, I love following the journeys of other young entrepreneurs. And today's episode, I spoke to Roman and Konstantina from KDIM. If you're a big gamer like me, you'll love this episode, and if you're not a gamer, that's cool as well, because it's a great episode with two incredibly intelligent university students that are experimenting with artificial intelligence to revolutionize the gaming development industry. So you might as well listen as well, it's pretty decent. We talked about why game production has become increasingly so expensive and how their AI solution is already being utilized by one of the largest gaming development firms, and their journey building up to recently winning a £10,000 grant from their university. We also talk about how the future of virtual reality gaming and how their technology could be the catalyst to induce VR gaming. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. It's a real pleasure making these episodes, so I really hope you enjoy. And if you do, it'd be great to leave a written review on Apple Podcasts, share it with your friends, and yeah, just enjoy it. Let's go on with the episode. Roman, Konstantina, how are you?
Good, thanks, Sina. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, we're good. Thanks for having us.
No, it's my pleasure. It's definitely a unique experience for me because I've never had two guests on the podcast. So yeah, it's good to have you both. I hope it works well. So how are you guys keeping busy with this whole lockdown period?
So one of the main things that we're kind of doing at the moment, we tend to use Facebook Messenger video calls, voice calls, and that sort of thing, basically to stay in contact with each other. It will be generally we're messaging each other throughout the day, kind of going, what do we need to do? Oh, right, we need to have this thing done. And then if we have stuff to do, we'll kind of ring each other. We've got a sprint plan, which we have to do at the start of every week to kind of keep track of everything that we're doing. And then mostly it's like, did we have a meeting this morning? Oh, yes, we do have a meeting this morning. Okay, cool. Right. I should get out of bed and go and do stuff now then, I think.
No, yeah. I think we're busy. We're very busy. And this whole thing, our business has kept us very busy and at the same time sane, because we have to talk to each other. It's so much, and we have so many things to do that we're actually very productive through the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of this. I'm in the same sort of boat. I'm working on, obviously I launched this podcast in the lockdown period, and then I've got my own business to concentrate on and stuff like that. But when I'm not working, I play a lot of games, which is something that's kind of new for me. I mean, I did before when I was younger, but recently it's definitely increased, and I'm interested because you guys are actually in that space. Your startup concentrates on that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think your experience is entirely typical from what we've seen and what we've heard. I mean, one statistic is something like Xbox Live players were up 75% after the start of the lockdown period. So everyone is now sat at home and they're like, I don't know what to do. So I'll switch on the TV and the Xbox or the PlayStation or whatever, and then boot up games. I think Steam keeps repeatedly having busiest weekends ever. So people just playing more and more video games.
Yeah.
Crazy how many people worldwide just have turned to video games and connecting through digital worlds to keep each other company and do something that makes them feel good.
So are you two big gamers yourselves?
I think I'd consider myself probably less so now, but I used to be very, very, very heavily into video games. I mean, I grew up in a tiny village, of which a few hundred people, most of which were significantly older than me. Nearest town being a 2-hour bike ride away up these mountainous hills, which is surprising for Lincolnshire. It's the only part of Lincolnshire with hills, which was excellent growing up. But I became very, very acquainted with my computer and video games because that was kind of my escape mechanism and my way of communicating with other people because I couldn't go visit them in person. So it's kind of less so now because I've just got so much stuff going on, but I do go back and revisit. I think I recently played Metro Exodus, which is really good. That just came to Steam, having been on Epic Game Store for about a year. Less so, but still significantly into it. And I kind of follow kind of gaming news. That's part of the reason why I'm so interested in this space, because ultimately I see that a lot of the video games that are being produced now, they're kind of derivatives of other stuff that's come before. It's like, it's this year's Ubisoft like Assassin's Creed game, which is great, but there's not the same degree of perhaps experimentation and risk taking, simply because the costs of these things are just growing and growing and growing. So part of the reason why we wanted to found KDIM, or I wanted to found KDIM, was because I think that if we can reduce the costs and therefore the risks of making games, we can get a lot more exciting games that I'll want to play.
That's what I was going to ask you guys. I was going to ask, are you guys big gamers? Is that where the whole idea behind KDIM came from?
Well, I think it was twofold. The reason was twofold. For me, for example, I got into gaming later in my life. So when I went to uni, because many of my uni friends were into gaming. So I started like that. But I don't consider myself a big gamer. For me, it was more watching a frustration that existing in the industry. So like through our computer science units that we had to ourselves create a 3D world and fill it out with like different objects and stuff like that, I realized how repetitive and time consuming this process is. And then when you scale it and imagine what, like the production of all these like huge games with like tens of hours of gaming and playing, then it's just like, to me it was scary.
So where does KDIM come in? How does KDIM fix these problems?
Yeah, so the main point of KDIM basically was what we found from our own experience and from talking to people in the industry was that these processes for making assets, you think about a video game, you think of all the things in that video game, all of those are assets which need to be made by someone. And we found that the process for making those assets is just incredibly time consuming and therefore really expensive, because designers just have to sit there at a computer for hours and hours and hours to make everything that's in these games. And if you think about big open world games, for example, like you think of all of the different numbers of things that are in those games, it's just mind blowing. And that's basically just driving the costs of video games up and up and up. And again, coming back to, if the costs go up, then the risk of any individual game goes up, and therefore you get less risk-taking, less exciting games potentially. So where KDIM comes in is basically a tool to help speed up that process by offloading some of the repetitive work that the designers currently have to do to AI, because we're both we have experience with AI, and we also have experience with 3D modeling and that sort of thing. So where in the industry there might not be that kind of skill set coming together, because we have experience in both areas, we saw that this is a potential area to alleviate some of these difficulties, where if we offload a lot of the repetitive stuff to AI, then we can speed up the process of making these assets to enable designers to spend more time polishing, which increases the quality of the games coming out, which reduces the risk. It reduces the costs because it reduces the time, because designers no longer have to spend, let's say, 10 hours making an individual asset. They now only have to spend 1 hour making an asset, because the assets are produced from our system almost done. And in so doing, we help to alleviate a lot of the kind of frustration around the creator in the industry, and it hopefully enable more people to be able to realize their creative vision, because we think that there are a lot of creative visions which could be made, which currently can't be made because of the limitations of the technology.
And to add on that, we're like KDIM wants to offer a competitive advantage to the gaming companies that will use our software, because they will be able to create more like exceptional and genre defining work, because their 3D designers will have more time to polish and actually be creative than giving so much time away to starting from scratch every time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So give me like an idea about how this like how long it would take for say like a designer to design one of these assets that you said. So say for like a game like GTA, huge detail in these games. Now I've been playing GTA for pretty much my pretty much my whole life, for like quite a young age actually, which is bad, but I've seen the level of detail shoot up massively, you know, and you're saying that so for like in the background, so if there's like a chair or a lamppost or something, how long could something like that take to design
Yeah.
Well, for
currently?
simple objects like chairs and tables and stuff like that, an expert artist might need like I don't know, an hour or maybe
Wow.
anything between half an hour to an hour. But for like big things like spaceships and like things that attract attention, it might take like up to 2 weeks. So there is like a big range of how long objects might take to develop, because like simple objects for these artists are quite like easy to do, but then there are other objects that need weeks of work.
Yeah, and that obviously pushes the cost up, as you said, Roman.
Absolutely, yeah. It's because of the time spent. Like, even if you have expert designers, even if they can produce a chair in 30 minutes, it's like you get what a chair is. That 30 minutes is just spent. If they could spend that on other things, it would be a lot more valuable. So, and there's thousands and thousands of chair models out there. So if you can create something which can just create them in a blink of an eye, then that becomes really, really useful. Because even if it's even if it only takes them 30 minutes, if it now takes them like 5 seconds, that's a massive, massive improvement. Touching on
Yeah.
GTA, so we calculated an estimate that the assets produced for GTA 5 would probably cost somewhere around $40 million for that whole production. And then scaling it by
Wow.
industry trends. So if GTA games followed industry trends, I think we calculated that if GTA 6 was to release next year, the asset production costs for that game would be somewhere in the region of like, I think it was $270 million, which
Yeah,
is insane.
yeah, that's
God. Wow.
yeah,
I
totally
guess that's
insane.
why they're not creating as many games as before, because I've seen, the release of games used to be a lot more frequent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from a consumer standpoint, that's what it was. There was a new game almost every year for a lot of these franchises, but now it's a lot more limited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think back to the kind of the PS2 era, it seemed almost like the co-
Great
yeah,
era.
the costs of video game production at that time were at a really sweet spot between kind of expectations around what the technology could produce and also therefore the cost, where it was just getting enough in terms of like graphics quality that you started to get a really nice idea of the geometry and the shapes, and it started to look real. But at the same time, it wasn't quite the level of photorealism that consumers kind of expect nowadays. So you had a lot more games being produced and a lot more kind of adventurous games being produced because the costs of development were just not as high as they are now. And it's difficult because everyone always wants to be kind of pushing the envelope further. It's we have the biggest game and we have the best quality
Yeah.
graphics and ours is the most photoreal, and it's great that that's the case, but that also leads to an arms race of, well, if this game is photoreal, then we need our game to be not only photoreal but also 20% bigger, and that leads to the consumers expecting, well, if all of these games are photoreal and they're all massive and hundreds of hours of gameplay,
Yeah.
then any game that's less than that is like, oh, well, that's not so impressive. I might not buy that. I'll wait for these
Yeah.
other
No,
big
I get
games.
you.
So you kind of see a stratification of the industry where you have the massive budget AAA games, which are highly produced, photoreal, hundreds of hours of gameplay potentially. But then in that same section, because the costs are so high, they also go, well, now in order to recoup our losses, we need to introduce microtransactions and loot boxes and all of these sorts of monetization strategies, which in some ways could be argued to dilute the kind of the brand image of these games, because you start to annoy
What
consumers.
are those? Just to explain
Yeah,
them
so
that you just mentioned.
microtransactions might be you buy a full game at $60, and then there are extra things which aren't included in that game, which might be a character texture pack, or let's imagine character clothes or something. You have some amount of character clothes in the game, but then there's these extra character
Yeah.
clothes, which, they're microtransactions because maybe this set of character clothes is only $2, but there'll be people who pay for the full game and then they want everything. So they pay for the full game at $60. They pay for all of the new clothes at $2 each, and that adds up very, very quickly. But it's the
Yeah.
companies are kind of stuck in a bind where they can't really raise the cost of an individual game, so they have to experiment with all these other monetization strategies. Which, sure, they get them back loads of money, but they also potentially lead to customers who don't want to pay that and don't like those things in their games, um,
Yeah.
kind of reducing the brand equity for those consumers. And they're like, oh well, I don't want to play these games anymore because I feel like I'm being exploited, so I'm not going to support that kind of thing.
Yeah. I guess you could say that with like the new FIFA games, there's been a massive drop in the amount of users because of the very reason that you said.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, if you look at the long term sustainability of this sort of thing, it's almost it's eating away their long term brand sustainability, because in the short term these game bets are so risky. And again, it kind of goes back to this whole idea of the games companies can't take as many risks anymore. So everything is like a sequel of things that have gone before, and it's very, very rare that you get new IP, and new IP is often the most interesting stuff. So it's a bit of a shame, really.
Basically, we're saying that, consumer demand, consumer expectations are rising way faster than the technology can keep up.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're saying, right? So kind of how does Kadem come in to relieve all of that?
Yeah, so we come in and we say that we can increase the productivity of every designer in the gaming companies by 10x. So yeah, so like if someone needed a week, then now he needs a couple of hours to make this big thing. And at the same time, he can iterate very quickly and like show something to their supervisor, and they say tweak it like that, and they can very quickly tweak it without scratching the whole thing and starting from the beginning. So it like it accelerates the whole pipeline of 3D asset creation. At the same time, they can it has an advantage of the companies being able to use their archives, their existing archives of like all the 3D assets that they've produced in the past, because we can train our models and create the new novel 3D assets based on the company's style. So then it
Yeah.
also makes everything even more quicker. And yeah.
Okay. So at the moment they have to make each one from scratch, whereas your technology would come in and kind of with the artificial intelligence, right, would create new ones for them in a fraction of the time that it takes them currently.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
so with an input of an image, then we output 10 predicted 3D models that look like the image that the designer sketched.
Wow, okay. How does that work?
Yeah, so basically, the aim of it is kind of you put in an image, and then it matches. The AI is able to identify the image, and kind of in the same way that humans can look at an object and understand that, even though there's parts of it that might be occluded, so you can't see them, and maybe you can't. There's bits of it which are slightly oddly shaped. It is trained such that it can understand from that image, okay, so I'm looking at this model and therefore I can recreate it in 3D. So we have a whole bunch of systems which can kind of analyze and then generate these 3D assets based on these images. So there's kind of a lot of there's a lot of exploration at the moment with existing tools. There's this one called Houdini, which is kind of a person, an individual basically kind of procedural modeling toolkit.
Yeah.
Design tool. It's super complex, really, really steep learning curve, which I know because I've tried learning it. And I'm getting there very, very slowly. But yeah, so we come in and basically assist those tools, those existing tools, by augmenting the designers themselves as kind of an assistant to enable them to realize their vision sooner by allowing them to, from a single image, you throw it in, our AI comes up with a bunch of like generated models which look similar to that image with a few variations. It's like a parameterized model, basically. So it has parameters. So you imagine a chair. If someone threw an image of a chair in, we can get our model to create 3D assets that look like that chair, and then there are a bunch of different things which you can slide. So, I don't like how that chair looks. I want it to be taller. So we have like the height slider, and you just slide it and it increases the height. So that just saves a lot of time for designers, because our AI model is kind of a complex mix of neural networks and procedural methods and all this sort of stuff merged together, basically to try and augment rather than replace. I think that's one key thing which is very important to us, is that we never want to be replacing human designers, because human designers create the most interesting stuff. Like, humans are the creative engine which makes anything interesting. So we want to augment human designers to speed them up, and we never want to replace them. So if we can be a tool which augments them and augments their existing tools, then that's really good for us.
I was just gonna ask about the tech. I'm not from a tech background, so I have to kind of educate myself. What were those two things that you said? So you said neural networks, and there was something else. What are those?
Yeah. So we're using a combination of neural networks. So recently, there's been lots of advances in artificial intelligence, and probably the most widely used thing when people say artificial intelligence is they mean neural networks, which is basically a bunch of kind of nodes which lead into each other, similar to the way that the brain works. So it's a bunch of it's all sorts of things which, from an input, they go through a bunch of different layers, all of the layers connect to each other in unique ways which can be trained. And then the output is something which you can again train. So we kind of use that, where you can look at an image, and it's kind of similar to how, if you look at an image, then you can predict what's in that image. There's elements of that in there. And then the twist for us is there's also this stuff called procedural methods, which is basically rules for generation. So procedural things might be, if you think about a tree, you can kind of model a tree by saying, if you have a trunk, then you draw the trunk, and then at some point along the trunk, you split the trunk into two branches, and then you keep doing that for some amount of time, and then when you reach an end condition, you draw leaves, and that's how you might generate a tree. So that's kind of a procedure for how you generate trees. So we're kind of joining neural networks with procedural methods in order to produce something which takes advantage of both of them, and also assists the designer in getting an output that's usable and useful for them.
Wow, yeah, sounds really cool. How did you, like, Konstantina? How did you guys come up with this idea? It just seems very like an amazing idea. How did you come up with it?
I think it was a lot of things that played a role in coming up with the idea. I think the main incentive was our experience with 3D modeling, but then units in the university like artificial intelligence, and then machine learning, and then this year deep learning, gave us the push and gave us the understanding to make that leap, to connect two things that we had expertise on and make something new.
Okay, cool. And how did you find out that this was actually a problem in the industry?
So we started by researching, like desktop research, and looking at numbers, and researching how much time designers have to spend on 3D assets. And then we started talking to people. So, for example, we sent out surveys to every gaming company, active gaming company in the UK, and asked them from their experience how much time 3D asset creation was or what percentage of the whole game production 3D asset creation was taking them, and what percentage of their budget they were allocating for it, and questions like that to figure out if there really is a problem. And at the same time, we were asking questions like, have you spotted like any problem with your current pipeline? What would you change? And then we gathered all these answers, and we like boiled down some insights, which proved that our idea was that the problem that we had, discovered really exists.
Okay, cool. And then, so you collected all the surveys, you realized that, yeah, there was a problem here. And we also know the technology to implement. So yeah, what was the next sort of stage?
Yeah, so we after getting those kind of surveys back, we went through more kind of research stage. So we talked to people in the industry, lots of interviews, again confirming that this indeed was a problem that was worth solving. We had some ideas around what we might want to build. From our kind of technological background, we knew that we wanted to do something with AI, so we was kind of searching for a problem and a use case that was painful enough that would be worth solving, and therefore seeing if we could apply AI to it. After that, it was kind of ideation, where we looked at a lot of current research papers or past research papers to see if there was things that people had done before, but maybe not exploited to the biggest degree. And we found a few things like that, whereas kind of they'd done some research in this different area that we can then adapt and think we can use in this specific area. And then building from there, we basically looked at all of that and kind of distilled it down into, okay, we have a few different ways that we think we could build this. One of the first things we did was we built a very, very basic website, which I think we threw together in about a day, which is just a landing page, which there was this function which rendered the page, and it has this like probability thing. So it was there's a 33% chance of getting any one of the individual page designs, and each of those different page designs had a different version of the idea. So I think we were testing whether or not designers wanted it to be an image input, a word input, or like an existing 3D model input. And from that, and also from our interviews and talking with Aardman, who at this stage we talked to, and they were interested in the idea, we decided that an image to 3D model solution would be the most valuable, because that's what the feedback we were getting. So we set about building that, basically.
So Aardman's the company you guys are working with now, right?
Yeah. So we're currently testing our first prototype with them. They were interested in the idea. We got in touch with them during our initial research stage, and they were looking for ways to kind of use some of their material, their existing material, in new ways. They're sitting, of course, because they have a long and storied history of creating things which people love. So they are sitting on an archive of lots of pieces of data, but they're not sure exactly what they can do with it. So they were interested in this project in part from a way of, can they use this data for something that's useful in all the stuff they're doing now? And we came in and we're basically like, yeah, well, we think that we have a way, so let's work together. And yeah, they're testing our prototype at the moment, and
that sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Really.
Yeah, it sounds really good that you actually got a really big company on board. Just what games do they make? Just so people can know.
So I think that they're only just getting started in video game production. So they're mainly based in films and animation. I think they have produced. Okay. I think they have produced one game which
it's 1111.
Yeah,
1111 Memories Retold.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a First World War based game. It's kind of a story game,
Yeah.
but that's like the first game that they've made, and then they're kind of exploring that area further. And I think over time they're going to get more and more into it.
AI, artificial intelligence, is a term that's thrown around so much. Every big company's talking about AI and blockchain as well, but AI is something that's thrown around so much. Is it something that hasn't really been explored too much in this industry?
Yeah. Well, I have to reiterate what you said actually about AI being thrown around a lot. I think a lot of companies, because it is very
Yeah,
much a buzzword, it's kind of,
huge
well,
buzzword.
we're
Yeah,
going to claim that we're using AI for our systems when actually it's not core to what their offering is. It's some kind of tiny aspect of analysis on some tiny component of their system. But yeah, they stick it in because it looks shiny and it gets them investment. Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
I think the difficulty with AI and using AI for solutions to these sorts of problems is that the skill set is very difficult and very rare to have in one person. So you would either probably be an artist and a designer, or you'd be a machine learning engineer. So these two skill sets uh, don't necessarily come together that often, and so that might explain why people haven't necessarily explored this area too thoroughly yet. Which I guess is kind of interesting to us in the sense that we do have this skill set. But yeah, I think that's probably primarily the main reason. It's difficult to bridge that gap if you have one area of knowledge but you don't have the other one, which I
I
guess
think
is
that also big companies that do like gaming and stuff like that are so focused with their games productions and with their deadlines, and like no one has the time to think, new innovations, and like, and if they even have an idea, they like the work they have to do like makes them forget about it, and that's where the power of a
yeah,
startup is. And because we have like zero risk to try this, and like either it's going to get us somewhere or it won't. But like big companies cannot like risk that. They can't risk like a lot of resources going into something they're not sure about, or their
yeah,
company is not ready to.
yeah. So we kind of absorb the technical risk of creating things, and if these
yeah,
companies don't want the risk of producing a game which may not sell 10 million copies or something, they definitely don't want to invest in this risky technology development. So they're quite
yeah.
happy to let other people do it, and then they'll just buy the
Exactly.
product at the outcome.
Yeah, it makes sense because you said, it takes massive amount of resources to make a game, especially the consumer demands nowadays. They don't want to spend resources on technologies that might not work. Well, I mean, it's risk, it's R&D, as you said. So, but I mean, obviously, yeah, it's risky for you guys, but obviously your university believes in you because congratulations are in order because they just gave you a lot of money, didn't they?
Yes, that's very true. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, although I think it's been blasted from the rooftops of the university, like a lot over the past few days. So KDIM has won the new enterprise competition, growth stage. So there are actually three stages to this. There's the idea stage, the development stage, and then the growth stage. And we've had money from each of the stages before, but we've just won the kind of the overall prize, which we didn't know this or didn't really consider this before, but apparently it's quite rare for an undergrad team to win the overall thing. So I guess that it's a good vote of confidence for us that tells us that we're doing something which is actually valuable and people think that it's valuable, which is very, very kind of affirming. Yeah, I think a lot of universities are starting to see the value in kind of student entrepreneurship, where previously that was much more kind of focused on America. You see like Stanford
Yeah,
and Silicon Valley and all of these sorts of universities where they kind of deeply embedded in the whole kind of startup ecosystem. But I think definitely over the past couple of years, um, the southwest of England has become a lot better for kind of startup ecosystem. Where I can't remember who we were talking to, but they said that even if you look at, like, say, 5 years ago and the amount of people recruited into startups in the Southwest, um, over a whole year 5 years ago, the same number of people that were recruited in that period were recruited in, like, the first 3 months of this year. So it's really, really rapidly growing,
Wow.
which I guess links in with our degree, because myself and Konstantina are both on the new, like, X with innovation. So we're both computer science with innovation, which we were in the first year to ever do that degree. So we're going to be graduating in July into this wonderful time. But the beginning of that degree, I think, is kind of has fed from the growth in the startup ecosystem in the Southwest, and in turn will feed into it again. It's kind of um, a beneficial circle of stuff feeding
Yeah,
into each
yeah.
other.
How much did you guys win, just out of interest?
We won 10 grand plus a set squared membership for 1 year, which is amazing because set squared provides so many services for the startups that are members and so much support. So we're overjoyed
Yeah.
to have won such an amazing prize.
So where will that money and support take you? Like, where do you kind of see the future of KDIM? Because this is a technology that seems like it's a long time coming.
Yeah, so the money will be primarily spent on all of the stuff to protect our IP that we've made over the past couple of months. So thinking about trademarks, patents for the kind of technology process, these sorts of things, kind of lay down the fundamentals of the value of the company. As we go into seeking further investment. So we're hoping to get a bunch of pre-seed investment to help us develop our technology further into something which we can start selling to companies. Hopefully, sometime in the next few months, get that in, at which point we'll be able to build out the team, develop the technology further, and basically capitalize on an opportunity that we see, which we think is only going to be growing and growing the more that people use games and kind of online digital 3D interactive experiences to connect with one
Yeah,
another.
yeah, for sure. Where do you kind of, just out of interest, because you guys are obviously researching this at all times, would this, because, 3D assets, as you said, they encompass all gaming, and I guess something like virtual reality, that would encompass that as well, wouldn't it? Virtual reality gaming.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. We were just having a discussion with a 3D artist, and we were talking about how VR and AR have been promising like a lot of stuff during the last decade, but they haven't yet. We haven't yet like seen these promises mature and like
Yeah,
become part of our life. You know what I mean? But I think there is definitely something coming from that way, from that direction. And actually, we know a company in Bristol who does that kind of thing. They're called condensed reality, but in games, I think that will slowly come in, and then 3D assets will need to be even more
yeah,
polished and even more of greater, resolution and stuff like that, because people will be able to look around and
yeah, yeah.
go closer.
Yeah. Why do you think that hasn't actually happened yet? Do you think it is because the technology is the limiting factor where, they have to spend massive amount of resources on something they might not get the return back? But if your technology comes in, makes the whole process cheaper, that they can put those, games out, experiment with them, so people understand if they like them or not, basically, if the market likes it.
Again, yeah, I think it's kind of VR's hit a perfect storm of for the makers of VR experiences, the costs of producing
Yeah.
those experiences is very, very high because of all of the other trends in the industry. And effectively, VR games at the moment are incredibly risky. And because these companies don't want to take too many risks, They don't want to put all these time and effort into
Yeah.
making these games. And on the flip side, on the consumer side, again, the technology to participate in these experiences is still incredibly
Yeah.
expensive. I mean, I watched a video earlier today comparing I think it's the Valve Index VR set with another slightly less expensive one. And I think a lot of people, they're kind of, it's still very expensive. I mean, the Valve Index is like it's basically $1,000, which is prohibitively expensive for most people. But at the same time, they are uncertain about wanting to buy uh, a lesser headset, VR headset, because they're worried about, oh well, is it going to be as high fidelity quality as these other things? So they're kind of waiting and
Mm.
waiting to see. So it's kind of, it's a combination of risks because of costs on the development front and risks because of costs on the
Yeah.
consumer front. But we think that definitely with our technology developing further, if we can bring that cost down for producing these assets to the degree which is needed for these VR experiences, then hopefully we can in some way play a part in driving the growth of
Yeah.
that sector, because if it does take off, then I'm sure it'll be really, really exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've been to one of those like VR gaming experiences and it was a lot of fun. And I think as a consumer of gaming, I'd love for, these game companies to take more risks. I think that's when, that's when the magic happens. That's when you get really cool games come out of these companies when, they are allowed to take those risks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of experimentation going on with indie developers at the moment, in part because they're using production methods which can reduce the costs and time needed for the development. I mean, you see a lot of indie developers go with kind of a low poly style, where it's definitely not the photorealistic that would be, well, maybe not required but expected of a AAA game.
What is low poly? Sorry, what is low poly style?
Like a Minecraft, which is
Oh,
like
I see.
all cubes, and
Okay.
it's not like complicated with details, not complicated shapes,
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
like low polygon. It's a sort for low polygon.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Yeah, so it's like highly stylized, much quicker to produce because there's not as much detail. Um, but yeah, not necessarily used in AAA, because again, it's kind of consumer expectations about what a AAA game has to look like are very much not in that area. So it's a difficulty, because even if indie developers are using this kind of style for their games, AAA developers can't really use it because the consumers have different expectations about what an indie game is allowed to look like versus what a AAA game is allowed to
Yeah,
look
for
like.
sure. Final question from me before we wrap up. How big, I'd love an answer for both of you actually. How big do you see KDM getting?
Yeah, so I think personally, my optimistic expectations, which I think are nonetheless doable and reasonable, is that, so I mean, starting off, you look at the just the individual 3D modeling market. I mean, I think at the moment it's about $3.6 billion, which is growing at 11% per year. So in 10 years' time, that'll be about $10 billion. I think our technology could be used in a lot more than just that specific industry. So if you think not just in games, but in architecture, in furniture design, and interior modeling, all of these different experiences, I think you can potentially 10x that or more. And I know that we both have a lot of ideas about different areas that we can expand into, improving our product further. So, I mean, optimistic expectations would be that we can grow this into something that's very, very large and be kind of the company which you associate with if you want to get something creative done. If you want to realize your creative vision, you go to KDIM.
Yeah,
That's my
Yeah,
hope.
sounds great,
yeah. I
Konstantina.
think we're aligned in this one, me and Roman. Yeah, our vision is a world where anyone can realize their creative vision. So yeah, we're starting with games because we know there's a problem here that needs to be solving, but we want to expand and um, and just have all the creative industry and helping them.
Sounds great. How can I love what you guys are doing because as a consumer, I didn't know about this stuff, but it definitely makes sense because resources are definitely the limiting factor, and I guess that's why they're not coming out with as many games as frequently as they used to. In the golden sort of PS2 era, that was probably the best era for me. How can people kind of keep in touch with you guys? How can people see what you're up to and track the progress?
So we've got LinkedIn. We're quite heavily active on LinkedIn, so you can find us there at Kaedim, Kaedim. We're also on Twitter, Kaedim _ at Kaedim _. You can find us on both of those places we post. You can visit our website, www.kaedim.com. And on that website, you'll find an email sign up. So if you want to give us your email, you can sign up to our email list. And occasionally we post updates on what we're up to. If there's any specific stuff that we're doing that we think people might find interesting. And very, very shortly, we're actually going to be coming out with our own podcast. We're not sure what it's going to be called yet. We're still kind of figuring that stuff out, but we have 3 recordings with people who've worked in creative industries, and we want to kind of explore how creative people are thinking about how their industries are going to be changing in the future. So if you keep an eye out on our podcast, on our LinkedIn and Twitter and email list and all that sort of stuff, you should find all of our updates.
Sounds great. I'll put all those links in the description.
Yeah, and if someone that's listening is just curious about what we do and want to get in touch, you can always drop us an email at admin@kaedim.com. We always love getting emails from people interested in what we do.
Okay, great. Roman, Konstantina, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sina. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Millennial Entrepreneur. It was a real pleasure recording with Konstantina and Roman about Kaedim, and it's a technology that I really feel is going to revolutionize the gaming industry. If you did enjoy, please be sure to leave a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts, as it really does help me out. Follow us on your Instagram page, the link's in the description. And share it with your friends if you want. My name's been Sina, I'll see you in the next episode.